A billionaire was walking down the street when he saw 3 kids lying by the side of the road. He went over to them and decided to take them home to care for them. But when the oldest girl woke up, the billionaire was shocked because, if you enjoyed our story, don't forget to follow us. Leave a comment below and tell us about the weather when you're watching this video. The house was silent, broken only by the creak of the wind seeping through poorly sealed windows. In the smallest room, Amber sat on the floor, a baby in each arm. The little twins fidgeted restlessly, seeking the warmth only a mother could offer. But their mum wasn't there anymore. Amber pressed her lips together, trying not to think about her mother's face, pale and still in that last moment. She couldn't afford to cry. Tears wouldn't feed her siblings or keep them warm on cold nights. Once again, she hummed the song her mum used to sing to calm them, but her voice trembled, and the notes seemed to get lost in the dimness. "Shh, I'm here. It's okay," she whispered, stroking one of the baby's cheeks. His tiny hand reached for Amber's, closing in a small, fragile fist that broke her heart. The front door forcefully opened, causing Amber to hold her breath. The sound of her father's unsteady boots filled the house, accompanied by the clinking of a bottle. An unintelligible mumble could be heard, then a low growl. Amber felt her stomach clench. Quickly, she wrapped the babies in an old blanket and carefully placed them in the farthest corner of the room. She signaled them with a finger to her lips, as if they could understand her, and then she stood up. The man's figure appeared in the doorway, dark and disheveled. His jacket was covered in stains, his hair matted. In his hands, an empty glass bottle hung precariously. "Where's my dinner?" he growled, his voice hoarse and full of contempt. "There's no food, Dad. You spent all the money." Amber's voice was barely audible, yet she was aware that there was no correct response. "What did you say? Are you talking back to me, you ungrateful brat?" The man stepped toward her, and his smell of alcohol filled the air. Amber recoiled instinctively, but the man had already raised his hand. The slap caught her by surprise, making her cheek burn. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She had learned that tears only made him angrier. "Worthless," her father growled, before staggering into the living room, where he collapsed heavily into a rickety armchair. Amber took a deep breath, allowing the pain to settle like an old acquaintance. It wasn't the first time, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. She went back to the twins, who had started to cry, probably scared by the yelling. "It's okay. It's over. I'm here," she whispered to them tenderly, ignoring the burning sensation on her face. She picked them up again and swayed slightly, as she had seen her mother do so many times. She remembered how her mother used to sing while preparing dinner, even when she was tired. She remembered her hands, always busy, but never too busy to stroke Amber's hair or kiss the twins on the forehead. For a moment, she closed her eyes, fervently yearning to return to those days, only to find reality a resolute, unyielding wall. From the living room, the sound of snoring resonated, signaling that her father had fallen into an alcoholic sleep. Amber got up slowly, making sure not to make any noise. She placed the twins on an old mattress and went out into the backyard. The cold night air enveloped her, but she didn't mind. She looked up at the stars, seeking solace in the vastness of the sky. "Mom, I don't know how much more of this I can take," she whispered, her voice breaking. The tears she had suppressed all day finally slipped down her cheeks, but even then, she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't afford to be weak, not for herself, not for the twins. She went back inside, closing the door carefully. She watched the little ones, who were finally asleep. The peace on their faces filled her with a strange kind of hope. Maybe she couldn't change her father's violence or bring her mother back, but she could promise herself that she would protect them, that she would find a way to give them something better. The morning arrived slowly, dragging in an icy air that seeped through the cracks in the walls. Amber had slept little, keeping a close watch on the door, Hours ago, her father's erratic snoring had ceased, signaling the impending start of hell once more. The twins woke up first. Their small cries filled the room. Amber picked them up carefully, trying to calm them before the noise reached her father's ears. But it was too late. A sharp knock against the wall on the other side of the house announced his presence. The door burst open, and the figure of her father appeared in the doorway, more menacing than ever. His shirt was disheveled, and his bloodshot eyes showed that alcohol was still circulating through his veins. "Damn brats! Can't you stay quiet for a minute?" he shouted, his voice full of rage. Amber stood up quickly, placing her own body as a barrier between the twins and her father. "They're scared, Dad. I'll take care of it, please don't hurt them," she said, trying to keep her voice calm, even though she was trembling inside. But he wasn't listening. His unsteady steps brought him closer to the bed where the twins lay. With a rough motion, he picked up one of them, barely supporting him under the arms. The little one began to cry, his fragile body shaking in the air. "If he doesn't shut up, I'll shut him up for good," he roared, raising the baby higher, as if he were about to throw him to the ground. "No!" Amber screamed, moving forward quickly. Her hands grabbed her father's wrists with a strength she didn't know she had. "Let him go, Dad. Please, don't hurt him." The man hesitated for a moment, surprised by his daughter's resistance. But instead of calming down, his fury doubled. He pushed Amber backward, almost making her fall to the ground, but in his staggering, he dropped the baby, who landed awkwardly in Amber's arms. "You're responsible for all this," he growled, pointing at her with a trembling finger. "If you weren't so useless, things would be different." Amber didn't respond. There were no words that could calm someone consumed by hate and alcohol. Her mind raced, and in that instant, she made the decision. She couldn't stay any longer. This house and this man were a constant threat to the twins. If she didn't take action, an irreversible event would inevitably occur. Amber hugged the baby to her chest and ran to the bed, where the other twin was. She quickly wrapped him in a blanket, her hands moving hastily but carefully. Her father looked at her, confused at first, but when he understood what she was doing, he let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can run away from me? You won't get far," he yelled, staggering toward her. Amber didn't answer. With the two twins pressed against her chest, she ran towards the back door. She knew she didn't have much time before her father caught her. Her heart was pounding, driven by fear and adrenaline. The back door gave way with a creak, and Amber ran out into the yard. Despite the morning cold hitting her like a slap in the face, Amber didn't stop. The sound of her father's footsteps echoed behind her. She ran towards the low fence that separated the yard from the main road. "Get back here right now!" he roared, his voice getting closer and closer. With a desperate effort, Amber climbed the fence, carefully holding the twins as she passed to the other side. She fell to the ground, but got up immediately. The baby's cries filled the air, but she didn't have time to calm them. All that mattered was getting as far away from that house as possible. The road ahead of her seemed endless, but Amber didn't look back. Her father's words faded into the distance, and for the first time in a long time, she felt there was a chance, however small, to escape the hell that had been her home. The icy air burned her face, but each step she took moved her a little further away from danger. She looked at the twins in her arms, still crying, and whispered under her breath, "We're in this together, little ones. I'll protect you, no matter what." And with that promise, Amber moved forward, her heart heavy but full of determination. The city was slowly waking up, but for Amber and her siblings, the night didn't seem to have ended. Her bare feet brushed against the icy asphalt, and each step she took was a struggle against the exhaustion that weighed on her body. It wasn't quite dawn yet, but the faint rays of the sun were beginning to filter between the buildings, bathing the deserted streets in a grayish light. Amber carried one of the twins pressed against her chest, while the other rested on her right arm. They were both crying, their little bodies trembling despite the old blanket that enveloped them. She hummed softly, trying to calm them, but her own voice sounded broken, as if despair were drowning her from within. "Shh, shh. We're almost there," she murmured, even though she didn't know exactly where she was going. The icy wind blew hard, and Amber had to stop for a moment to protect the twins from the cold. Her lips were chapped, and hunger twisted her stomach. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping the babies safe. As the daylight grew, Amber continued her march. She passed through an alley filled with trash dumpsters. Her wrinkled nose caught the sour and nauseating smell, but her mind barely registered the repulsion. She needed to find something, anything, to feed her siblings. Carefully, she placed the twins in a corner of the alley, protecting them from the wind with the blanket. Their little faces were reddened by the cold, but they weren't crying as hard anymore. They were perhaps too exhausted to continue. Amber approached one of the dumpsters and pried it open. The lid screeched, shattering the silence of the alleyway. Inside, she found moldy food scraps, pieces of bread as hard as rocks, and bits of plastic that had once wrapped something edible. She reached in, rummaging through the trash, hoping to find something salvageable. "No, this can't be," she muttered, her voice choked. A wave of despair washed over her. She collapsed to her knees next to the dumpster, her hands trembling as she tried to hold back tears. But she couldn't anymore. Tears streamed down, hot and silent, as she buried her face in her hands. "I just want to help them. Mum, what do I do now?" she whispered, as if expecting an answer from the void. The cry of one of the twins jolted her back to reality. Amber quickly wiped away her tears and went back to them. One of the little ones was awake, feebly moving his arms, while the other seemed asleep, though his breathing was shallow and uneven. Amber hugged them tightly, as if her warmth could make up for everything they lacked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "But I'm not giving up. I'll get you out of here, I promise." With renewed determination, she stood up and kept walking. She didn't know how much longer she could go on, but she couldn't afford to stop. Her mother always said that life was like a river. Even when the water was turbulent, it always found its way. Amber found solace in those words. As the day wore on, the exhaustion became unbearable. Each step was a monumental effort. Her legs were shaking, and her vision began to blur. Amber knew her body was at its limit, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Finally, she reached an empty park. She found a worn wooden bench and collapsed onto it, with the twins still in her arms. The babies were crying weakly, their cries more like whimpers than shouts. Amber cradled them, but her hands barely had the strength to hold them. The cold bit at her skin, and her head began to spin. Everything seemed blurry, as if the world was about to fall apart. "Just a moment," she mumbled, closing her eyes for an instant. But that instant turned into minutes. Her body slumped against the back of the bench, with the twins still in her lap. The sun was high in the sky when Amber opened her eyes. Her heart was beating weakly, and her muscles ached as if she had been running for days. She looked at the twins, who could barely move their little bodies. Fear pierced her like an arrow. She knew they couldn't go on like this. She had to find help, and fast. With a last effort, she got up from the bench and started walking again. But this time, her pace was slower, more unsteady. Each yard seemed like an eternity. Finally, her body gave out. Amber collapsed next to the sidewalk, her arms still holding the twins. She looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who could help them. Her vision blurred again, but before everything turned to darkness, she thought she saw a figure approaching. "Please, help us," she whispered before losing consciousness, with the twins still nestled against her chest. The night seemed to swallow the small bodies of the 3 children. At that moment, they were in a luxury black car. The soft rumble of the engine echoed in the quiet city streets. Nathan Howard, sitting behind the wheel of his expensive car, barely paid attention to the cityscape passing by. It was a daily routine, working late, going home, and facing the emptiness of a huge but silent mansion. A life full of success, but lacking something essential. As he turned a corner onto a deserted avenue, something caught his eye. On the edge of the sidewalk, a figure slumped against the cold concrete. Nathan slowed down as he approached. There, under the dim glow of a streetlight, he saw a girl with two small bundles wrapped in faded blankets. Even from a distance, he could tell the girl was still, her head tilted to one side, while the babies barely moved. Nathan slammed on the brakes and exited the vehicle, immediately feeling the crisp morning air. He approached cautiously, assessing the situation. "Are you okay?" he asked, but got no response. The girl, thin and pale, appeared to be unconscious. Her face showed signs of extreme exhaustion, and the babies in her lap barely let out a weak whimper. Nathan felt a pang in his chest. He'd seen a lot in his life, but this scene, so raw and real, hit him like a ton of bricks. "I can't just leave them here," he muttered to himself, crouching down beside them. With careful movements, Nathan first picked up the babies, feeling how light and fragile they were. Then, he scooped up the girl, making sure all three were protected from the cold with the blankets. He placed her in the back seat of his car, settling her as best he could, and then sped off, his heart pounding faster than usual. The drive to his mansion was silent, broken only by the faint cries of the babies. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror frequently, making sure they were all right. The girl remained unconscious, her breathing irregular, but steady. A series of questions flooded his mind. Who were they? How had they gotten into this situation? Where was their family? But above all, he was overwhelmed by one certainty. He had to help them. When he got home, Catherine was already awake, brewing a cup of tea in the spacious kitchen. Hearing the front door open, she looked up with curiosity. She wasn't expecting Nathan so early, let alone with company. "What's going on?" she asked, seeing the worried expression on her husband's face. Nathan didn't say anything at first. He simply walked in with the two babies in his arms, while gesturing towards the door, where a bodyguard was carrying the girl. Catherine dropped the mug she was holding, the sound of shattering glass echoing in the kitchen. Her eyes widened as she looked at the little ones, whose faces were red from the cold and marked by dirt. "Nathan, who are these kids?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he admitted, gently placing the babies on the living room couch. "I found them on the street. I couldn't leave them there." Catherine approached slowly, almost afraid to touch the little ones. When she finally leaned towards them, something inside her broke. She stroked the cheek of one of the babies, who opened his eyes weakly. The contact seemed to calm him a little, and Catherine felt tears begin to stream down her face. "They're so fragile," she whispered, looking at Nathan with eyes full of emotion. What could have happened to them? Meanwhile, Amber began to stir on the couch, waking up with a gasp. Her eyes, big and dark, filled with panic as she saw the unfamiliar place and the figures surrounding her. Instinctively, she searched for her siblings. "My brothers!" she exclaimed in a raspy voice, trying to sit up. Hey, they're right here," Nathan said quickly, stepping closer to calm her. "They're safe. Nobody's going to hurt them." Amber, though visibly exhausted, relaxed a little, seeing the babies nearby. Then she looked at Nathan and Catherine, her eyes filled with distrust, but also gratitude. Who are you?" she asked weakly. "My name's Nathan, and this is Catherine, my wife. We found you on the street. You needed help, and we brought you here," Nathan replied calmly. Amber looked down, hugging herself as if trying to protect herself. She didn't know if she could trust them, but something in Catherine's gaze, so full of tenderness, made her feel a glimmer of safety. Catherine, unable to restrain herself, approached and knelt in front of Amber. "Honey, I don't know what you've been through, But you're safe now. We can take care of you guys, at least for now. Please, let us help you." Amber blinked, surprised by the warm tone in Catherine's voice. She wasn't used to anyone caring about her or her brothers. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed it quickly. She couldn't allow herself to fully trust yet. Catherine picked up the babies in her arms, a tear rolling down her cheek. She turned to Nathan, with a determination in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. "Nathan, we can't let them go. Look at these kids. So small, so helpless. At least, let them stay for a while." Nathan nodded, his face serious but understanding. "Of course, Catherine." Night had completely fallen on the city, enveloping Nathan and Catherine's mansion in a deep silence, broken only by the occasional creaking of old wood and the faint crying of the twins. Amber was perched on a large armchair, way too big for her small, hunched frame. Across from her, Nathan and Catherine watched her intently, their faces calm but strained. Catherine held one of the babies in her arms, gently rocking it, while Nathan cradled the other in his lap. Amber didn't know how to start. There was something about Catherine's gaze that disarmed her, a warmth that contrasted with everything she'd known. Nathan, for his part, remained silent, but his eyes held a mix of curiosity and concern. "You don't have to tell us anything you don't want to," Nathan began in a calm voice. "But if you're going to stay here, we need to know how you got into this situation. We want to help you guys out." Amber swallowed and glanced at her siblings. The babies, now sleeping peacefully, seemed oblivious to all the suffering around them. That gave her strength. For them, she had to speak. "I don't have anywhere to go," she started, her voice barely audible. "My mom, she passed away a few months ago, when my brothers were born." Catherine tensed slightly at the words but said nothing, letting Amber continue. "She was everything to us," Amber continued, her eyes fixed on the floor. "She was kind, hardworking. She did everything she could to make sure we were okay, even when we didn't have much. But when she got sick, everything changed." She paused, fighting back tears. Catherine let out a shaky sigh and looked at Nathan, who nodded slightly, urging her to go on. "After she died, my dad, he changed. Well, not changed. He always drank, but he used to do it on the sly. Now all he cared about was the booze. He lost his job and he started taking it out on us." Nathan clenched his fists, but kept his expression neutral. Catherine, on the other hand, couldn't stop a silent tear from running down her cheek. "I did everything I could to take care of my brothers," Amber said, clenching her hands in her lap. "I gave them what little we had, tried to keep them warm. But he tried to hurt one of them," she said, her voice breaking completely. "That's why I left. I couldn't let him hurt them." Catherine brought a hand to her mouth, unable to contain the sob that welled up within her. "You left alone with them?" Nathan asked, his voice soft but full of disbelief. Amber nodded. "I couldn't stay. I didn't know where to go, but it didn't matter. I just wanted to keep them safe." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. Catherine looked at the twins in her arms, their small faces peaceful, and then at Amber, who seemed much older than a 12-year-old girl should. It was too much to bear for someone so young. "You're really brave, Amber," Catherine said finally, her voice shaky but firm. "What you did, not just anyone would do that, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Not anymore." Amber looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Catherine leaned forward, holding the girl's gaze with an intensity Amber had never seen before. "I want you to stay here, all three of you. This can be your home. We can take care of you." Her voice cracked at the end, but her words were clear. Amber felt something inside her give way. It was like the fortress she had built to protect herself was finally crumbling. "Why?" she asked, her eyes full of mistrust and vulnerability. "Why would you want to do that for us?" Catherine smiled softly, her tears shimmering in the warm lamplight. Because I know what it's like to want something with all your heart and not be able to have it. Because you and your brothers deserve better. And because I couldn't live with myself knowing I could have done something to help, and didn't. Nathan, who had remained silent, nodded slowly. Catherine's right. We can't change what happened to you guys, but we can make sure you're safe now. If you want to stay, this is your house. Amber looked at them both, her mind flooded with conflicting emotions. She wasn't used to kindness, to the idea that someone could care about her without expecting anything in return. But the warmth in Catherine's eyes, the firmness in Nathan's words, was hard to ignore. Finally, Amber nodded, her lips trembling as she tried to smile. Thanks. I don't know what to say. In the days that followed, their lives gradually integrated into Nathan and Catherine's family. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the house. It was a warm and inviting fragrance, so different from the cold and damp alleys that Amber and her siblings had left behind. From the kitchen, Catherine moved with ease, making breakfast while humming a soft tune. She had one of the twins propped on her hip, and with a free hand, she stirred a small saucepan of warm milk. Amber was sitting at the dining room table, with the other twin nestled in her lap. She watched Catherine in silence, unsure how to act. The familiarity with which Catherine held her younger brother, the way she whispered sweet words while feeding him, was something Amber hadn't seen since her mother had passed away. It was comforting, but also strange. "Want some more milk?" Catherine asked, turning towards her with a smile. Amber shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. I'm okay," she replied softly, her eyes falling to the mug in front of her. Catherine gave her an understanding look. She didn't push it, but her smile didn't fade. In her heart, Catherine understood that gaining Amber's trust would take time, and she was willing to take every step necessary to build that bridge. Nathan walked into the kitchen at that moment, with a stack of papers in one hand and a calm expression on his face. Seeing Amber and the twins, he put the papers aside and sat down across from her. "Good morning, Amber. Did you sleep well?" he inquired, his kindness bordering on perfection. Amber looked up, noticing how his voice resonated gently in the room. She nodded, though not entirely sure if that was the answer she should give. "Yes, thank you, sir," she said, and then quickly looked down again. "Call me Nathan, okay?" he replied with a genuine smile. Then he added, "And if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask. This is your home too." Amber nodded once more, but the phrase, "your home," lingered in her mind. How could this place be her home? She still felt like she belonged to a different world, one where the walls weren't so clean, where voices always carried a threat, and where the nights were endless. During the day, Catherine dedicated all her time to the twins. She bathed them carefully, changed their clothes, and made sure they were always well fed. Amber, on the other hand, watched them from a distance. Although she was the one who had cared for them from the start, it felt strange to see someone else take on that role. Catherine, however, always invited her to participate. "Want to hold him while I dry the other one?" Catherine would ask casually, as if she knew exactly how to ease Amber's discomfort. Little by little, Amber began to accept those invitations. Feeling her brother's little hands in hers reminded her that her promise to protect them was still intact, but this time, she wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Nathan found subtle ways to connect with Amber. He showed her the house library, filled with books she never imagined touching. He showed her how to use the large desk in the study and told her about the places he had visited when he was younger. Without imposing anything, he simply offered her a space where she could feel comfortable. "Do you like to read?" he asked one afternoon as he handed her an illustrated storybook. Amber looked at it suspiciously at first, but then took the book and mumbled, "My mum used to read me stories, but there weren't many books at home." Nathan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just smiled, letting Amber explore the book on her own. That night, the house was silent. Catherine and Nathan had retired to their rooms, and the twins were sleeping soundly in the crib that Catherine had placed near Amber's bed. However, sleep wouldn't come to her. She was lying on her side, staring at the ceiling, while memories of her old life came back in waves. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, she sat up and leaned over the crib. Her fingers gently stroked her brother's cheeks as tears filled her eyes. "We're okay now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're good. They won't hurt us." She stood there for a moment, letting the tears flow silently. For the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of fear or despair, but of relief. The house, once cold and quiet, was now filled with life. The twins were crawling across the living room floor, their laughter echoing as Catherine tried to keep up with them. Amber, sitting on the couch with a book in hand, watched her siblings with a smile that had become increasingly natural. It was such a stark contrast to the grey days of her past that she sometimes struggled to believe it was all real. Nathan, from the dining room table, observed his family with a quiet satisfaction. Catherine, who for years had avoided talking about her pain of not being able to have children, now glowed with a renewed energy. Each day she seemed lighter, more complete. "Aren't they amazing?" Catherine said, looking up at Nathan as one of the twins grabbed onto her dress, trying to stand up. "They are," Nathan smiled, resting his chin on his hand. "Thanks to you, Catherine." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "No, Nathan. Thanks to them." Amber looked up from her book and met Nathan's gaze. Though still shy, something about the way he looked at her made her feel like she belonged there. A warmth she was just beginning to understand slowly settled in her heart. The sun was beginning to set when the doorbell interrupted the tranquility. Catherine, carrying one of the twins, went to open it while Nathan picked up the other. Amber, feeling an inexplicable knot in her stomach, slowly got up and stood near the staircase. Catherine opened the door, and the first thing she saw was a face that seemed carved from stone. A large man, with eyes bloodshot with hate, stood before her. His breath had a faint trace of alcohol, and his hands were clenched into fists. "Can I help you?" Catherine asked, instinctively holding the baby tighter. "I'm Amber's father," the man growled, his dark eyes scanning the entrance to the house. "I've come to get my kids." Catherine experienced a shiver running down her spine. However, she remained calm and replied firmly, "Amber and the children are safe here. They don't have to go back with you." The man let out a bitter laugh and took a step toward the entrance. "Safe? They belong to me. I'm their father, and if you think you can keep them, you better be ready to pay for it." At that moment, Nathan appeared behind Catherine. Seeing the man, his eyes narrowed. The tension in the air was palpable. "Who are you?" Nathan asked, his voice low but filled with authority. "I already said, I'm the father of those brats you got here." The man crossed his arms, straightening up. "I don't care what you think. If you want to keep them, you're going to give me something in return." Nathan stepped forward, placing himself between Catherine and the man. Though his posture was calm, his gaze conveyed a silent threat. "You lost the right to call yourself a father the day you put them in danger. Now get out of here before I call the cops." The man clenched his teeth and pointed a trembling finger at Nathan. "Do you know who I am? I'm the only father those kids have. If you believe you can keep me away from them, you're mistaken." Nathan maintained his fixed gaze, not giving ground. "I won't repeat myself. Leave. Now." The man stood still for a moment, as if assessing how far he could go. Then he let out another bitter laugh and backed away towards the path. "This isn't over," he said, his eyes filled with hate. "I'll be back, and you'll regret getting in my way." Catherine, still trembling, slammed the door shut as soon as the man left. Nathan stood there for a moment, looking out the window as the stranger walked away. His jaw was tight, and in his eyes was a mixture of anger and concern. Amber, who had heard everything from the staircase, felt her heart pounding. Though she didn't say anything, fear began to seep into her mind. She knew her father wasn't one to accept defeat easily. The storm was raging against the house with fury. Strong gusts of wind made the windows creak, and the rain beat against the roof with a deafening rhythm. After an exhausting day, Amber had fallen asleep in her room. The house was quiet, but the darkness outside seemed to envelop it with an unseen threat. It was close to 3 in the morning when a muffled thud shattered the calm. Amber, who normally slept with one ear open, bolt upright. The sound came from downstairs, like someone had forced the back door. Her heart started pounding as she heard heavy, clumsy footsteps. She carefully got out of bed, but before she could reach the twins' room, she heard another noise, the creaking of the crib. Amber felt a knot in her stomach. She ran to the door, but when she opened it, the room was empty. The twins' cribs were a mess, and the blankets were strewn on the floor. An open window let in the wind and rain, soaking everything in its path. "No!" she cried, her voice cracking as she approached the window. Outside, in the darkness, she could barely make out a figure moving away quickly. Amber's screams woke Catherine and Nathan. Catherine ran, her robe trailing behind her, but she halted abruptly upon seeing the empty room. "Where are they?" Her voice was a whisper at first, but quickly turned into a desperate scream. "Where are my babies?" Nathan arrived just in time to catch her before she fell to the floor. Catherine sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to his chest while repeating the same mantra. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." Amber, standing by the window, stared out into the rain with tears in her eyes. Her mind was flooded with guilt. She had promised to protect her siblings, but now they were in the hands of someone she knew wouldn't show any mercy. "It's my fault," she muttered, almost inaudibly. "I should have done something. I should have been with them." Nathan, though his face was tight, tried to stay calm. He got up, helping Catherine into a chair, and then turned to Amber. "This isn't your fault, Amber. Listen, we're going to find them, but I need you to keep it together, okay?" His voice was firm but reassuring, an anchor in the chaos. Nathan pulled out his phone and quickly dialed the police, explaining the situation with precision and urgency. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to cry, her trembling hands covering her face. Amber stayed close to her, trying to console her, though she could barely control her own breathing. The ringing of the phone broke the tension a few minutes later. Nathan answered immediately, but the voice on the other end wasn't the police. It was him. "Did you think you could keep them away from me forever?" The man's voice was filled with venom. "Your rules, your money, none of that matters to me. The kids are mine, and if you want to see them again, you know what you have to do." Nathan clenched his jaw, walking toward the study so he wouldn't alarm Catherine and Amber any further. "Listen, you don't have any rights to them. Give them back now or you'll face the consequences." The man let out a bitter laugh. "Consequences? Is that a threat? The kids are with me. If you don't want anything to happen to them, deposit the money into the account I'm going to send you. And don't call the cops or it'll be the last you hear from them." The call ended, leaving Nathan with the phone in his hand and his chest full of contained rage. He remained silent for a moment, trying to process the threat, before returning to Catherine and Amber. Nathan knelt beside Catherine, who looked up at him with red and swollen eyes. "We're going to get them back, I promise you," he said, taking her hands tightly. Catherine nodded weakly, but her eyes still reflected a deep fear. Nathan then turned to Amber. "I need you to trust me, Amber. We're going to bring them back together." Amber, though she was still shaking, nodded. For the first time since she had come to this house, she felt like she wasn't alone in her fight. Night had completely fallen when the headlights of the patrol cars illuminated the road to the woods. The wet leaves crunched under the wheels as the convoy moved slowly forward, guided by the faint light of a flashlight pointing the way. The air was heavy with moisture and an oppressive silence, broken only by the murmur of police communications. In the back seat of one of the vehicles, Catherine clenched her hands in her lap. Her fingers trembled, and the weight of uncertainty seemed to sink her into the seat. Nathan, sitting next to her, maintained a rigid posture. Though his face was calm, his eyes reflected an internal storm. In a more secluded corner, Amber watched the scene, hugging herself, her thoughts consumed by guilt and worry. "We're here," the police chief said, stopping the car. In the distance, barely visible among the trees, a small wooden cabin stood, dimly lit by a hanging lamp on the porch. The cabin looked like it was crumbling under the weight of time and neglect, but the danger it hid inside made it even more terrifying. "Stay here," the police chief ordered Nathan and Catherine as the officers got out of the vehicles and began to take positions. Nathan pressed his lips together, wanting to protest, but he knew he couldn't interfere. He grabbed Catherine's hand, who seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "We're gonna get them back, Catherine. Trust them," he said in a whisper, more to convince her than himself. Amber, from the back seat, muttered, "Please, make sure they're okay. They can't take any more." Nathan nodded, though he couldn't find words to respond. He knew any words would be insufficient in the face of the anguish consuming them. From the car, the three could see the officers surrounding the cabin in silence, their silhouettes blending with the darkness. A pair of flashlights flickered in the distance, like tiny stars in a lightless sky. The police chief signaled, and the officers began to approach. Time seemed to stop. Each second stretched like an eternity. Catherine didn't take her eyes off the cabin, her lips murmuring silent prayers. Nathan kept his gaze fixed, while Amber dug her nails into the palms of her hands. Suddenly, the silence broke. An enraged scream echoed from inside the cabin, followed by a loud bang. The flashlights moved rapidly, and the sound of boots hitting the ground filled the air. "Police! Let the kids go now!" a voice yelled from within. Catherine covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a sob. Nathan squeezed her shoulder tightly, as if that gesture could keep her upright. A few minutes later, which felt like centuries, the doors of the cabin burst open. An officer ran out, carrying a baby wrapped in a dirty blanket. Behind him, another officer appeared with the second baby, both crying weakly. Their little faces were red, and their bodies were visibly trembling in the cold. "My babies!" Catherine screamed, running towards them before Nathan could stop her. She fell to her knees in front of the officer, holding the first twin, extending her arms desperately. The officer bent down to hand him over, and Catherine cradled him against her chest, as if fearing he might disappear at any moment. "Oh my God," she murmured through tears, kissing the baby's forehead. His skin was burning to the touch. "They're so hot. They have a fever." Nathan, following closely behind Catherine, took the second twin in his arms. His jaw trembled as he looked at the little one, who could barely open his eyes. "We got you. We got you now," he whispered, his voice cracking. Amber, watching the scene from a distance, finally let the tears roll down her cheeks. For the first time in days, she felt relief mixed with a pang of pain. She hadn't been able to protect them, but they were alive. The officers quickly escorted them back to the vehicles. Catherine and Nathan never stopped holding the twins, whispering words of comfort to them as the cars moved towards the hospital. The little one's fever continued to rise, and their weak whimpers pierced the hearts of their foster parents. Amber, sitting in a corner of the back seat, watched Catherine and Nathan. For the first time, she understood what it meant to have someone who would fight for you, no matter the cost. Her hands trembled as she leaned towards the twins and murmured, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never let anything like that happen again." When they got to the hospital, the doctors whisked the twins away, rushing them to the emergency room. Catherine clung to Nathan, unable to let go as she watched them disappear behind the double doors. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, bathing the room in a warm light. The twins rested in tiny bassinets next to the bed where Catherine sat. Her face, though still showing traces of exhaustion, was lit up with an expression of relief and deep love. Nathan stood beside her, a hand resting on her shoulder, watching the little ones as they slept. "They've improved a lot since yesterday," the doctor said, entering with a reassuring smile. "The fever has subsided, and a few more days of rest will restore their health." Catherine sighed with relief as she closed her eyes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gazed at the twins. She leaned over one of them, gently stroking his cheek. "Thank you," she murmured, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to. The doctor, the universe, or simply those two little miracles who had survived it all. Amber, who had been sitting in a corner, watched in silence. She had spent a sleepless night worrying about her brothers and feeling guilty for what they had endured. But seeing Catherine and Nathan caring for the twins with so much love, something inside her began to shift. Catherine looked up at Amber, noticing her dejected expression. She stood up, crossed the room, and knelt in front of her. "Amber, I want you to know something," she said softly, taking the girl's hands in hers. "This isn't your fault. What happened doesn't define who you are. What matters is that you're here, that you love them, and that you would do anything for them. That's what matters." Amber couldn't hold back any longer. Tears started streaming down her cheeks as she threw herself into Catherine's arms. It was the first time she had allowed herself to cry openly since everything had begun. Between sobs, she mumbled, "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving us." Catherine hugged her tightly, stroking her hair. Nathan watched the scene, his chest filling with a mixture of pride and love. When Catherine sat back down, she took Nathan's hand and said, "These kids don't just need a home. They need a family, a real one." Nathan nodded slowly, looking first at the twins and then at Amber. There was something solemn in his expression as he knelt in front of the girl, getting down to her level. "Amber, I want you to hear this, straight from me," he said, his voice firm but warm. "You and your brothers aren't just our responsibility. We're not just the people who take care of you. We're your family. And I want you to know that you will never, ever be alone again." Amber looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with emotion. She nodded slowly, unable to say a word. A few days later, when the twins were strong enough to go home, Nathan and Catherine called a lawyer to formalize the next step, legally adopting Amber and the twins. The idea had been on both their minds from the beginning, but recent events had solidified their decision. They needed to ensure that nothing, not even the threat of the past, could tear this family apart. The meeting with the lawyer was brief, but emotional. As they signed the documents, Catherine couldn't hold back a tear as she inscribed her name on the document that legally established them as the parents of their 3 children. Nathan, though more reserved, squeezed Catherine's hand tightly, as if that gesture sealed their commitment. When they returned home, everything felt different. The house, which had once been a temporary shelter, was now a real home. Amber started decorating the room she shared with the twins, hanging up little drawings she had made during the days at the hospital. Catherine and Nathan, meanwhile, worked together to turn an empty room into a playroom for the kids. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the faint rustling of the documents that the judge was reviewing carefully. Amber, sitting between Catherine and Nathan, held her adoptive mother's hand tightly, while the twins slept peacefully in their strollers across the room. Although no one spoke, the air was charged with anticipation. After reviewing all the documents and considering the circumstances, I declare that Catherine and Nathan Howard are now, officially, the parents of Amber, Tommy, and Anthony. The judge's voice resonated with solemnity, but his lips curved into a slight smile. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Howard. You have a beautiful family." A choked sob escaped Catherine as she squeezed Amber's hand. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, but they were tears of pure happiness. Nathan, though more contained, smiled broadly as he placed a hand on Amber's shoulder. "We did it," Catherine whispered, looking at Nathan with shining eyes. Amber, unable to contain her own emotions, threw herself into Catherine's arms. For the first time, she heard the words she had always longed to hear. "You're our daughter, Amber. You always will be." Days after the judge's ruling, as the family celebrated at home, Nathan and Catherine began to talk about a topic that had been on their hearts for some time. "Nathan, have you ever thought about how much more we could do?" Catherine asked, watching the twins crawl across the living room. Nathan looked up from his book, a curious expression on his face. "You mean adopting more kids? There are so many who need what these little ones have now." Catherine sighed, her eyes filled with determination. "I think we can do more." Nathan nodded slowly, letting Catherine's words sink in. Finally, he smiled. "You're right. If we can offer others what Amber and the twins have, why shouldn't we?" A few weeks later, the family visited a nearby children's shelter. There they met Logan, a shy 7-year-old with a gentle spirit and curious eyes, and Mia, a 5-year-old girl who, despite her young age, seemed to have carried more sadness than she should. "Would you like to live with us?" Catherine asked softly to Mia, kneeling in front of her. Mia glanced at Logan before answering, as if seeking his approval. When he nodded slightly, Mia whispered, "Can we have a real mom and dad?" Catherine choked back tears as she took Mia's small hands. "You won't just have a mom and dad. You'll also have an older sister and 2 little brothers. We'll be a whole family." Logan and Mia officially joined the family weeks later, and the house that was already full of love now overflowed with life. Amber as a big sister. Amber embraced her new role as a big sister with a mix of pride and responsibility. Although she worried at first about how to connect with Logan and Mia, she quickly discovered they had a lot in common. Logan, shy but smart, looked up to Amber, seeing her as a role model. Mia, with her boundless energy, adored the twins and followed Amber around the house, mimicking her every move. "Hey, Logan, want to help me decorate the twins' room?" Amber asked one afternoon, noticing him sitting quietly with a book. Logan looked up, slightly surprised by the invitation, but eventually nodded with a small smile. "Sure, I'd like that." Over time, Amber realized that protecting her siblings wasn't a burden she carried alone anymore. Now she had an older brother to help her, and a little sister who looked up to her, giving her a fresh perspective on what it meant to be family. It was a sunny afternoon when the whole family went out to the backyard. The twins were playing with Mia on the lawn, while Logan helped Nathan set up a table for snacks. Amber was sitting on the swing that Nathan had recently installed, watching everyone with a peaceful smile. Catherine came over and sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked gently. I never thought something like this was possible." Amber paused, looking at Catherine with a mix of gratitude and love. "Thank you for everything, for not giving up on me." Catherine took Amber's hand and squeezed it affectionately. "You gave us more than we could have asked for. Thanks to you, this family is complete." As the sun began to set, bathing the yard in golden hues, Nathan joined them, holding a tray of lemonade. "May I interrupt this special moment?" he joked with a smile. Catherine laughed softly and leaned into him. "Never. This moment is perfect, because we're all together." The family gathered around the table, sharing laughs and stories while the kids ran and played. Amid the bustle, Catherine turned to Nathan and whispered, "This is a dream come true. This is our home. A complete family." Nathan nodded, wrapping an arm around her as he watched their children. In that instant, he knew that all the struggles and challenges had been worth it, because finally, they were where they always wanted to be, together. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values yet entertaining. See you there.